Okay. It looks like we got like a minute or two, but I would like to go ahead and get started. So my name is Michael Crump. I currently work in the Azure App Developer Experiences. And the talk that you're going to see here today is completely my own experience working with Azure for the last couple of years. So there really isn't a structure except for just demos. So a couple of the demos that I've had folks kind of request is kind of how I work with the Azure portal to some of my CLI to Azure Resource Manager templates and to functions in App Service and Cloud Shell. So hopefully you'll get something kind of out of this. I'm going to jump right in. Okay, inside of the Azure portal, um, most folks know that there is such thing as like keyboard shortcuts. So if you didn't know that that's there, you can actually click on the help and you can see your nice keyboard shortcuts. Most of the shortcuts are there, they're documented and that you can find and you can start using. But kind of in my day-to-day, there's like 4 that I use all the time. And I think one of these at least you'll find very helpful. So G plus A will quickly take you over to the all resources. This is obviously like where I start doing most of my work. And then like a G plus D will take you back over to your dashboard. So according to kind of where you want to land, it'll take care of you from there. And then also the search. This is G and it is the slash. Sometimes takes a second, but there it goes. So you can quickly jump back up to this, start typing in the type of resources that you're looking for, and you should be good to go from there. One of my favorite, though, out of all of that list is the ability to quickly navigate over to my favorites. So you can think of this as if you use the G key, you can go like G 0, 1, 2, and 3. So whichever one that you've assigned, just type that number. So like a G and a 4 would take you to the virtual machines. So again, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's just a really quick way to navigate to your favorites, to your favorite items. Okay, kind of a lot ball there. So we've also, there's the ability to change themes. And this is also another one that most folks know you can kind of double click on. But what I hear all the time is that I don't want that functionality. Get rid of it, please. And you can do that fairly easily as well. So back inside of the portal here, it says allow double click on dashboard to change theme. You can disable that and you can get rid of it for good. Another thing, while I'm already inside of the settings, is that if you would like to change your default view to like your dashboard. So personally, this is kind of my dashboard that I use, day in, day out. But I really want to go to home because our teams have different dashboards that are a lot more sophisticated than this amazing dashboard with one tile that I have. So you can always just click back on home, and when you load this up next time, you're going to simply go back over to your home and you'll see your recent resources, a couple of like useful links and more. One other thing is that when you're looking and you're trying to figure out kind of what's new, and especially like the roadmap, instead of having to leave the portal, you can stay right here. So like what's new, these are typically the little pop-ups that appear in this window right here where it says like notifications. So you can always kind of see what's new or what's happened. But more importantly is our roadmap. Believe it or not, there's a lot of folks that's like, hey, I don't read or I don't check out your roadmap as much. You can also jump to it right over here and you can see, okay, well, where it build, obviously there's a lot of things that's coming out. So that's a couple of my tips for the dashboard. But since we're kind of talking about keyboards, some of the other things is the Azure CLI. So you can download and you can install the Azure CLI. And you can run commands such as like AZ, this is the Azure CLI. And if you want to do things such as maybe check out your account, you can do something like AZ account list like table. You can run some of the looks like I missed it. You can run different types of accounts from here, but you don't get the IntelliType. And what I've found is that if I ran that same sort of command right here, if I did that AZ group list, you can see I start to get IntelliSense as I'm starting to type, which is pretty amazing. And even for like the more complicated ones, if I was trying to look at like our AZ group, and I did like AZ group, now I can see, okay, there's a couple of different commands here that exist for it, but it's a lot easier if I use Visual Studio Code and I use this extension called Azure CLI Tool. So from here I can do the deployment. Now I can see create, and if I don't know what it is, because most of the time I don't, there's also, that's kind of the built-in like functionality of kind of telling you what that information is. So I could do create, and then maybe I'm not even sure what's the next thing I want to do. Oh, okay, well, a resource group. A resource group makes sense, and then if I space again, this actually lists all of my different resource groups that I could actually deploy to. So it's pretty cool, and it's lightning fast, and again, it's just an extension called Azure CLI Tools. But what's also kind of neat about this is that where if you wanted to run one of these commands, you could actually just right-click, and you could run it inside of the editor here. So this is great whenever you've got somebody saying, hey, can you tell me these resource groups in this certain location? This is usually where I run it. I copy and paste it out, and shoot it in an email. And then also, while you're doing this, you can also run it actually inline in the terminal. So obviously it's the same sort of thing that you saw before, but now it's just built into the integrated terminal. A couple of other things that I think that's kind of interesting here is that a lot of folks are working with different types of like ARM templates. And so inside of those ARM templates, if you're like me, a lot of the times what I do is I will go and I'll try to like find an example. So like this is an example of a template for an Azure app service that I've created. But instead of like coming here, like copying the code and then kind of going through and trying to navigate it, I was constantly searching out a better way to actually start working with this. And so this is where kind of an extension saved my life here. So there is a extension called Azure Resource Manager Snippets. And what's kind of cool about this is that I can come into this absolutely empty file as long as it's named .json. Then I can do things like ARM, and you can see it says, okay, skeleton ARM template. This is kind of like the beginning. I could hit return. Now I'm inside of the schema, and if I went down into like the resources, for example, and I wanted to create like an Azure function, I could do ARM function. And so here it's like, okay, this is a V2 of the ARM functions. And so I can hit that. Now it started to kind of build that template out for me. And what's kind of nice here is that inside of this template, you'll see that it has highlighted a couple of the different pieces, such as it's got the function name here. As I type this back on line 35, it will automatically update that for me. And so you can also come through and you can like tab through each one of these names, and you really can put together an ARM template pretty fast without having to do too much work there. Another fun thing is that when I'm working with Azure Functions, so inside of, again, I'm going to stay right here inside of code, there is an Azure Functions extension. This Azure Functions extension allows me to do a couple of things that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do, or at least not as easy. So if I click on the Azure, and I have actually navigated inside of a function, and by the way, if you don't have this, you can use this extension here to do things like create a new project. You can create a function, and you can select like your different types of language types, especially some of the folks that have been playing with maybe PowerShell or Python. You can create that here. You can also deploy it here, and this is one that I completely built and deployed locally. Um, so once you have this set up, instead of, whenever I've been trying to like test my Azure functions, a lot of the times I would originally at least come here and I would say, oh, okay, well, let me run this function. Once I run it, down here in the output, I would start to get, I know you can't see that, but I would start to get the, okay, this function ran successfully. And if I wanted to add a parameter, I would come up here and I'd maybe, drop in something like name. I would also come over here and I may add in like my name. And then down at the bottom, I would hit run, and I would get the output that says like, hello, Michael. Well, that also works great for the smaller apps, but for the larger apps, there's no way I was going to always keep coming back and forth. So what I started doing there was, with this function, the extension already installed, I was able to right-click on it, and I was able to do things like start the streaming log. So I've already started it, but down here, the output of that same function will be able to troubleshoot it and debug it like directly from this screen. So if I take the the command that allows me to run a curl command really quickly on that Azure function, I'm just going to take this one for example, and I come over to my extension. Actually, I'm going to run it right here inside of terminal. I can see that, okay, well, it actually returned back the hello Michael, but in the output window here, it may need to be refreshed. I can also kind of get that same output that I had just in the Azure portal, which is it's pretty sweet. One other thing that typically happens is that whenever I start like a new Azure function project, and where maybe I've taken the existing JSON file or the existing application and I'm missing my local.settings.json. That's obviously the file that has all of the local configurations for that machine. This is typically a file that's not actually checked into like GitHub, for example. I've actually recreated this like by scratch by like going in, starting to type it, and then I would switch back over and I would go inside of like app settings, like this one, for example. I would look at the hidden value and I'd actually copy it out and like put it together. If you install the Azure Functions core tools, you can actually pull that down pretty quickly. So if I go back to my commands here, I'm going to use the command called func Azure and then function app, and then we're going to fetch the settings and then just the name of the resource. So again, back over in the terminal, and in this application, I've got a couple of secrets. I'm just pretending like I don't have anything in here at all. So like I got my secret name 1, my secret name 2, and if I come in here and run this, then my local.settings.json, it will return everything that was actually contained inside of that app settings. So for me, this was kind of a lifesaver of, hey, how do I quickly get my local.settings.json back together? And if you don't want to necessarily send that clear text back over to you, this flag of true could be renamed back to false. And then I'm just going to save the file here, and I'm going to rerun that command. And it should come back completely encrypted. Let's try it again. Encrypted. Oh, I didn't change this to true. So I'll change this to true really quick. This time we should get it. All right. It's for me, it's a kind of an easy way to kind of work with that file, because I'm always needing it for the different types of projects that we move straight across. Switching back over to Azure App Service. When working with Azure App Service, there is several things that uh, I believe, like with like diagnosing and with like troubleshooting applications that most folks aren't necessarily aware of. So if I go back over to an Azure App Service that I have, there's actually this ability to diagnose and solve problems. And as I've chatted with customers, there's hardly nobody that's like using this, and they should be using this, not only for the availability and like configuration and management, but the best practices is something that I find this has been fairly helpful. Especially, this is an application that I did absolutely nothing to. I just created it, left everything as the default, and while this is like a standard plan, there's a couple of things that they're saying, hey, right off the bat, this is some of the things that you could change. Like the always on check. That's where it keeps your application hydrated. For example, in this, it's actually not turned on. There's a couple of other things here. Auto healing, things such as utilizing Traffic Manager. Since I specified that this was at least a standard app, which means it usually runs about 50 bucks a month, you may want to start looking at being able to split that traffic into a couple of different places. Another kind of fun thing that is in here is deployment slots. Deployment slots, a lot of people kind of were used to seeing that moved in a different panel. It was actually in the classic panel. Now with deployment slots, you can see the difference between the two. So now it's kind of marked production. I don't know if you're like me, but I've actually swapped before on something that I shouldn't swap before. And even like these traffic percentage numbers. You can just easily adjust those. If maybe you want to do something like A/B testing and you want to send like 30% of your traffic over to one location and 70 to the other one. Another thing that's in here is configuration. We were just talking about application configuration with functions. One of the cool things here is that now this is actually the new configuration wizard. And in the new kind of configuration wizard, instead of like going in again and looking at each one of the secrets and trying to figure out what they are, there is this advanced edit. And what I found that's great about this advanced edit, if I want to go ahead and add like 10, 15 different items in here, I can do so really, really quickly. Again, this is kind of a new feature that nobody has, that very few have actually been utilizing and taking care of. One other thing that I have found that's interesting is this concept of locks. If your organization has like certain Azure App Services and resource groups and different things that you may necessarily want to lock down because there may be somebody that's going to do something bad there, you can quickly add like a lock. I'm just going to name this a lock, and then I'm just going to throw read only on this and hit OK. And what this lock does is it prevents people for either, it's just a read-only lock where they can just read. You can also, there's also a delete lock, but if I come into this, and since now I did this like system-wide, and I tried to look at maybe the console here, it says up at the top, it says this feature is disabled because this has a read-only lock on there. And as we're building and doing different types of demos and things, this feature has been absolutely amazing. So it's something that you should use. There's a lot of different ways to kind of set that up where it isn't so specific. Just to as I put it completely on this Azure App Service. One thing that I think that you may find beneficial is over here inside of alerts. There's this new alert rule, and you can create a rule. You can add a condition. I can add a condition based on like CPU time, and you saw before there's tons of different like ways that you can actually set and put together put together some rules. But maybe I want to use the power of some of the machine learning and some of the stuff that we've kind of learned about today. There is the ability to use dynamic. And what dynamic does is that over your application, your app service, for example, after it's been running for some time, it will calculate and understand how your app's performing, maybe what days that it's performing like better on, if there's any types of hot times. And what it can do is it can automatically help generate the correct alert logic. So that's absolutely it's kind of amazing. It's kind of free. It's just built in tons of information that's on that on how you can set up the different types of operators. I know every time I've done this in the past, it's been a little bit more difficult. And the last thing that I wanted to show you is Azure Cloud Shell. I'm sure most people are familiar with like Azure Cloud Shell and being able to have the ability to like switch between like Bash or like PowerShell. But one of the other things that I think is interesting here is that if you're using Azure Cloud Shell, you can also quickly upload and download files. So if I wanted to upload a file to my Cloud Shell, well, it would pop up a dialog box, and I could move that in there. Another thing, if I created a new file, my file.txt, and traditionally, let's just go use Nano. You may do some of the editing kind of here. I was going to use Vim, but I couldn't figure out how to exit out. So I'm going to exit out here. You use Nano, but also VS Code. You heard a lot about VS Code today and online capabilities. Actually, I can just type in VS Code, and from here, I've got my friendly VS Code commands. It's a lot easier to close out of these commands versus Vim, etc. So you can save the file. Also, the command palette, if you're familiar with VS Code, how their command palette works there, you have that ability to use that here. And then even if I didn't want to, use it just for a single file, up at the top there is a editor here, and so if I click on that, I can use the VS Code editor, and I can actually like just search through my existing drive that I've got. Like there's one of my public keys that I use for SSH. So with that being said, I am right at time, and so I will wrap things up very quickly with my closing slide here. I hope you got a couple of things out of this. This series is actually a blog-written series. There's about 190 tips that I put on there, and also communities put on there as well. And it's just at azuredev.tips. It's completely GitHub. It's open source. I allow contributions from anybody because I want it to kind of be a community type of thing. We have a couple of ebooks, and there's a video series that's come out of this, and then I create some stickers, and all those stickers, I open source all my stickers too. So, and then I've got some of these. I got a couple of special ones here for all of you. So thank you very much. I hope this was helpful. Maybe hopefully you got a tip or two out of it. And that is it. Thank you.